Thank you for your time. My name is Betula, and this is Shooting from the Hip. I appreciate you being here. Please keep in mind what we are doing here on Bet On It, Shooting from the Hip. We explore human ideas, philosophies, and noteworthy information. This exploration is us thinking aloud, a thought exercise, jumping into ideas and examining them and then re-examining them. You will find we are prone to using adult language and expressing opinions. In keeping with that, you shouldn't believe anything we say. We are not experts of any kind. We are just having fun with these ideas, philosophies, and information in the hopes that you will find it fun and interesting and entertaining. We encourage you to invest time in searching out these subjects and come to your own conclusions. Now on with the shit show. Slim, how you doing, buddy?
A little tired, but good. How are you?
No worse for wear?
Nah.
Right on. Today's topic will be, a topic of conversation will be the philosophy of the Cynics and the philosophy of Stoic or Stoicism. I always find it really weird to actually, when talking about being Stoic, because to me it always sounds like an adjective instead of like a noun. That you're Stoic, that you're being something particular. So when I say it, I find it weird saying it because even though I'm using it as a noun to refer to it as like this entire philosophical body, it feels weird to me. Is that weird?
No, I don't think it's weird. I think it's definitely not common to think about. So like when you think about like using it as a noun, it's definitely different than the way people traditionally use it just in casual conversation.
Right. The interesting thing, the reason why this stuff is noteworthy, the Cynics have been around since the earliest of times, right? And the cynicism from our earliest recorded histories, has allowed for it to, it's somehow managed to evolve, and now there's a contemporary or current cynicism, which doesn't have anything to do necessarily with nihilism and pessimism, but they do overlap, right? So we're going to talk about those at length, because when I say they've been around from the earliest of time, we're talking ancient Greece, right? And the Stoics, or being Stoic, or the idea of Stoicism, rose out of what the Cynics were talking about, right? So the Cynics are like a particular group of philosophers. We're not going to identify all of them, but some of the more noteworthy ones we're going to talk about. And you'll find it interesting because Stoicism has initially came out of ancient Greece, and then during the Renaissance experienced a revitalization or a rediscovery, and then now we have a contemporary or modern day version of it, right? So it's largely a very simple philosophy, but it's funny. It's the kind of stuff that when we on this channel, when we discuss subjectivity and objectivity, it directly plays into it. So it's actually very straightforward. Now, having said all of that, cynicism philosophy are people, it's people who are reasoning that animals and the purpose of life and the way to gain happiness is to achieve it through virtue. So whether you're a human being, any living creature, right, that it applies to them. So even though initially when you say cynicism, modern humans don't associate it with the purpose of life and a way to gain happiness and to achieve virtue. That's not typically how people,
right?
So that's not the meaning they associate with or cynicism.
Yeah, the way I hear it regularly used is more like nihilism. I can't define what pessimism is, but I feel like
it's just that pessimism is just a negative outlook on everything. You always see the worst of. It'd be somebody who's see the worst of every circumstance or any situation or anything. Okay. Always goes right immediately to the worst outcome.
That's what some people might assume cynicism means, when cynicism, not cynicism.
Cynicism.
Right. Like you say, that means like you're oriented towards virtue.
Right. That was the original, like as the Cynics those particular philosophers out of ancient Greece. That's how they identified it, right? So although it's taken on different connotations, so in modern times, it's like anarchy. If you say anarchy with today amongst any crowd or any group, immediately it's associated with like chaos and lawlessness. And actually its foundation is in ancient Greece and has nothing to do with chaos and lawlessness. Its literal definition is no rulers, right? So that's what anarchy literally means. But because it became a staple in pop culture in like the late 70s and in the 80s until today, but now the association is that somehow it means, absolute chaos and a lawlessness and stuff, which couldn't be further from the truth. It actually means no rulers. Let me be clear, all right? No rulers, heavenly or earthly. No one running running your show, right? So having said that, I get back to cynicism. So the idea is, the philosophy is that you're in agreement with nature and you're following one of the natural sense of reason by living simply and shamelessly free from social constraints. So it is kind of antisocial in that sense that like it's about resisting the conventions of a society. And remember, this is what's going on during ancient Greek times when they were city-states. Like they knew virtually nothing about the world around them, right? Most of it was largely, their view of it all was largely mythological, right? So it's interesting that even at our earliest attempts organizing in complex societies, there's individuals and philosophies that arise that are resistant to the conventions of any society, right? It's probably been going on consistently, for the last at least 5,000 years of recorded history, right?
That would make sense to me. Like, everybody wants to find at least one way that's a little different than convention, because convention doesn't work out for everybody.
Right, but I think philosophically, what the argument that the Cynics were making is that somehow the very nature of society went against your ability to experience happiness and to achieve virtue because of the conventions. The conventions actually prevented people from achieving that, right? So that's why they were anti the conventions. That's what, and they were evangelical. They proselytized all the time on street corners and stuff like that. But the Cynics were a weird, twisted group of individuals. So we're going to get to them very shortly. So they wanted to be free from social constraints, right? And to be open about it, not to have to be like to have it be hidden. They wanted to be transparent in that. So the Cynics rejected all conventional desires for wealth, power, glory, social recognition, conformity, and worldly possessions, and even flouted such conventions openly and derisively. Right? And that derisively means in a manner expressing contempt or ridicule in public. So it was the ability, like the freedom of speech, but to be mean-spirited about it, right? To deride, the conventions and openly, like just verbally assault them, right?
Oh, I've heard a good story about this one guy Diogenes who.
Oh yeah, we were gonna get to Diogenes, but go ahead, because he's one of the chief cynics, right?
Oh yeah, no, he has said some brutal stuff. One of my favorite stories isn't actually one of the brutal things he said. He saw, I think it was a kid drinking out of a river with his hands. So he was like, "Whoa, I can do that," and he threw away his only possession, which was a bowl. I'm not sure if it's a true story, but I think. It's representatively interesting.
Diogenes is an interesting character. We're going to talk about him very shortly. But the first philosophers to outline these themes were, I think, of Antisthenes, pupil of Socrates. So Socrates being the great philosopher of the Socratic method, but we can't confirm that he actually existed, except for the fact that his students wrote down his philosophies and promoted them and stuff. So we don't know that he was actually a real person. But Antisthenes was from the late 400s before the Common Era, right? And he was followed by Diogenes, who lived in a ceramic jar on the streets of Athens. So I take it that he was basically like a drunk, right? Like, so his only, you said his only earthly possession was a cup. Well, why do you need a cup? It's to drink stuff. And if he was astounded by the fact that he could use his hands to drink out of a river, then what was he using the cup for? Well, probably wine, right? Yeah. So, and Diogenes took cynicism to its logical extremes with the famous public demonstrations of non-conformity, coming to being seen as the archetypical cynic philosopher, followed by Crates of Thebes, who gave away a vast fortune so he could live a life of poverty in Athens. So, for such enlightened thinkers, the fact that they were sacrificed their material existence, to me, seems counterproductive. All right, and maybe challenges their own philosophy, makes them a bit of hypocrites. Now, having said that, you know, I'm somebody who's this kind of thinking has really resonated with, where you're openly in defiance of not just the public, but the conventions of modern society. You point out its shortcomings, and it's not meant to be a derision for derision's sake. You're not doing it just to be an asshole. You're doing it to go, hey, see where the shortcomings and failures are, because in those shortcomings and failures, that's where the abuses will occur, right? But these guys were like, you know, like, I'm going, how could you function if you're living essentially as a beggar and a homeless person, and then you want to be taken seriously when you present an intellectual argument against the way that we form our societies, and then point out the shortcomings in its conventions and in the way that it approaches life and living, and that the argument you make is there's a more natural order. Well, let me ask you this. How natural is it for you to be spending the majority of your time when you're not thinking profound, deep thoughts, drunk?
Yeah, no, I can agree. That definitely goes away from like classic cynicism when you think about it.
And these are the classic cynics. These are the guys who were promoting this philosophy, and yet they demonstrated behavior that to me seems kind of counterintuitive. Like it opposes even what you're saying. That if it's supposed to be a more natural and balanced, it's a life that reflects nature and a more natural way of living, then that would nature is balanced. Everything that happens within the course of nature is usually to sustain and maintain balance. But you're demonstrating, well, extremism. So I'm going, how's that? How do you reconcile that, right? So you had something you wanted to say.
Oh yeah. One story I like about Diogenes is they say like he spent a lot of time with the homeless dogs. He was one of them. He would just pee wherever.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, no, I support that. And then I hear, oh, he also peed on people who pissed him off. I'm like, that's not very.
But again, like you go, for somebody who is so enlightened in their thinking, for them to, in their actual behaviors, you should think that enlightened thinking would somehow translate into their behavior, right? And that's the argument that I often make when we're talking about subjectivity and objectivity. It's the way that the course of behavior. So I'll ask it, because I say this all the time. It's about choosing the most appropriate course of behavior. I'll bet you if you could get Diogenes to speak in his defense, he would argue that what he did was the most appropriate behavior. But to me, I go, not really. All you're doing is you're actually pissing on people that piss you off. You're antagonizing them. So you're not making any friends. And part of understanding is breaking down barriers. There's going to be people who, won't matter how compelling of an argument you make, they're going to refuse to accept what you say, which is fair. But it's not your job then to go after them. With the Cynics, they were like, here, we're flagrantly going to show you how much we just don't give a shit, and how little we care for your conventions and the social morality of your society.
Yeah, which is great, as opposed to what Diogenes most likely did, was try to have a conversation while he was drunk, piss off a guy. The guy called him an idiot. He's like, I'm gonna piss on you. It's like,
You can only imagine, flowing robes and whipping his junk out and just peeing on somebody's leg. Actually, it's really funny.
it's a good way to win an argument.
I don't know if that's really necessarily winning the argument, but it's a sure way to bring it to a close.
Yeah.
So the philosophy of Cynicism, it was probably the most striking during of all the Hellenistic philosophies that rose up, in those times. That claims to offer happiness and freedom from suffering in an age of uncertainty. So it's funny how what the claims that they offer are the very things that we seek today, right? Especially in this age of uncertainty. Doubt that things are uncertain, right? This economic climate is poor, if not outright bad. The current politics come off as very often as being only self-serving. So this is an age of uncertainty. There's instability everywhere. So you could see the appeal to any claims that would offer freedom from suffering and subjectivity and objectivity. I often, when I discuss subjectivity, it's the root of your suffering, right? So that if you can elevate yourself or train yourself to be more objective and to intercede when you're being subjective, by being objective, you can minimize your suffering. There's no avoiding pain. Pain is inevitable. It's part of the experience of being here. There's no getting away from it. But you don't have to suffer, right? And suffering is you drawing that pain from whatever that initial incident was that caused the pain. Now you perpetuate it forward in time. You keep it alive because it becomes your focus. So then, right? So it's, again, not good.
Right, which is one of the reasons why I hate people that identify themselves as a nihilist thinker, because they don't think to the extreme. It's like, okay, so your framework is nihilistic, which means you don't necessarily believe there's any end goal, end value.
Right, so it's all doomed. So then
Right.
What's the point?
Exactly. People don't exactly think the logical extremes of their ism. There's so many isms out there, you can't escape them all, but you can at least go looking at the word, maybe I don't want this ism in my life.
Well, again, objectivity would give you the clarity to be able to be discerning, to go, that kind of pointlessness, that emptiness, that empty pointlessness, why do you perpetuate your existence then in light of that thinking, right? To me, it's a failure to turn to nihilism, because nihilism's just about obliteration, and none of it matters, because once you're gone, it really does pander to the material reductionist scientific view that there's
Right.
nothing after this existence. The fact of the matter is, you want to know what the truth is? We can't successfully answer that question.
Well,
Right?
I think they have they have a history of going it's a logical, argument to have.
But even if you use logic and you try to reason your way to that point, at some point you're rationalizing, because you can't confirm that. This is what I'm saying. That's why I don't like the nihilists. They talk with again, absolute certainty, like somehow they absolutely know there's
Right.
that all of this is pointless. And that may well be true, but that doesn't mean you can't create a purpose or a point to all of this. That you can create a meaningfulness to your existence. It doesn't have to come from something outside of you, but which they're convinced of. That it has to, like, it has to, that because it's pointless and we're just all facing obliteration, there's no point to any of it. Again, probably the most inappropriate thinking, because it ignores the fact that you are here. And then in being here, then you get to choose what to do with the time that you have while you're here. But all you're going to do is fucking look down your nose and be pissy and talk about obliteration. You should fucking just find a dark corner and hang out there by yourself until you expire.
Well, yeah, the way I think about it is they're typically trying to put like a rigid logical structure around what they see, what's going on.
And it's not even reasonable. It's rationalization.
Right.
They're arguing. So the nihilism is a subjective view that they argue, and argue using as much logic and reason they can bring to bear.
I agree.
To confirm their bias, right? Instead of going that it's just your bias and it has no value, but you somehow determined that it's not only valuable, that it's absolute, and that somehow maybe that we should all be agreeing with it, and which I find again.
There's a whole rabbit hole with nihilist people, but like to put it shortly, they're trying to like put a very rigid logical framework on a map they don't clearly understand, because there's no complete understanding of the world. As far as we know, logic and reasoning, all these things are nice, but they're for the convenience of the human mind. We don't live in a logical reality. We have a very absurd reality.
Right, but applying reason and being rational, and understand the difference between being rational and rationalizing, because being rational is an extension of logic, right? That these are tools. These are intellectual tools to allow for you to navigate through the maelstrom that fucking is life, right? It's the thing that gives you the capacity to work your way through all the best and worst aspects of being here, wherever here may be.
Yeah, like cynicism wouldn't be like, oh, we're all doomed, so just fuck the dog.
Right.
Whereas cynicism would be like,
but although isn't that ultimately what Diogenes ended up doing, right? Like, right, like that even though cynicism is not it's not pessimism nor nihilism, they do share. They can overlap.
Yeah,
right?
The short way I would put it is their ideology is like, we're here now, what can we do?
Right.
It's not necessarily...
and they're trying to find the more... It's not just what can we do, but what's the most natural way of doing it? How do you live within the natural order of nature itself?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a comfortable answer, but it's a hell of a lot more comforting than, oh, you can be happy being sad. Like,
right. So and that's why they challenge the conventions of the way they organize society. Because their view is that it might be an unnatural way to live, the way that we organize our societies. It might actually, so then if it is an unnatural way to live, then this is the structure of this way we organize a society. It's not society itself. It's the way that we structure the society might be not only counterintuitive, but the source of a lot of like your misery, personal misery, anxiety, stress can all stem from that structure, because it promotes that in the individual, because it's unnatural. Right, so that's really at the root argument of the Cynics, that if you follow a more natural way to living, and it doesn't mean that you're reckless. It just means that you live, again, if nature is the example, that you're living, you're trying to achieve balance in every moment that you're living. All right, so. And to me, there's a very great appeal in that very notion that somehow you can achieve a balanced state in the way that you live from day to day, moment to moment, right? So there's something, like I said, to me it's endearing. I like it's why I'm aware, it's why I'm even tabling the idea of the Cynics and Cynicism, because it was an aspect of it that really resonated with me, and I thought made to me the most reasonable and logical sense, right? That you're ultimately trying to discover understanding, which would lead to balance, right? So, having said that, so remember, so in ancient Greece, they thought of their time as an age of uncertainty, and here we are living in a very similar kind of time, an age of uncertainty, right? And here's the thing: the Cynics had no official doctrine, right? The fundamental principles of Cynicism, the goal of life is uh, eudaimonia, right? And all that, it's a Greek term, and I hope I said that correctly, that it's really about aspiring to mental clarity or lucidity, and literally freedom from smoke, with the implication being that, like, smoke's the illusion, right? Like that freedom from the illusion, right? And the smoke is signified as like false belief or mindlessness, folly, and conceit, right? So the things that actually that even conventionally in today's society we recognize as being kind of not healthy, although most of us clearly like are driven by ego, which is to a degree conceit. We adopt mindless habitual patterns of behavior, so we're trapped in the mindlessness, and then we promote our beliefs or what we think without evidence. So that's smoke. That's how that's the smoke that they're trying to free themselves from, the illusion, right? And you can only do it through mental clarity and lucidity, right? And I would make the argument that you can only achieve mental clarity and lucidity by being objective, or another way of saying being present in the current moment. You have a direct awareness of the current moment, and as much as humanly possible, you are always bringing yourself back to the present moment. And in doing that, it gives you mental clarity, it gives you lucidity, and then now you're able to be discerning in such a way that you can choose appropriate behaviors and actions to accommodate the mental clarity, right?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that relates to like a few things I thought of. Like there's a story, if you're lost in a forest, as long as you know there's trees around you, you can walk to the next tree and that's closer out or closer in. But when you have like that's where the smoke comes in, like the veil, that's uncertainty by biological biases like your ego, or it could be conditioning.
Well, again, all of that stuff's contributing. It's another way of saying, like, so conceit and folly are usually they're associated with a subjective view, a self-interested view, and so the folly will be that you'll assume that your subjectivity is correct, and you'll argue passionately, and those who are trapped by their subjectivity, they're not unintelligent people. They very often try to make a very intelligent, rational, and logical argument for their position. But ultimately, if you can't produce evidence to support what you're saying, then it's just what you're saying. And again, I'm open to any ideas, but the very last question I'll ask, or the first one I'll ask when someone's finished, is, do you have evidence to support everything that you assert? And almost always they can never cite any kind of evidence. And again, to be fair, it's not like we dump a ton of evidence here, but we try to bring, well, whatever the current thinking is and present it, and whatever there might be for evidence, we do present. And when there's a shortcoming in the evidence, we acknowledge it. So, and again, right, the danger's not in having preferences or biases. It's when you start treating them with the utmost value, or worse, that they're somehow more valuable than someone else's, or they're more valuable than the objective truth, whatever that might be. Right? So that's the failing. That's where the failing is, right? And typically, this is what the Cynics were trying to free themselves from, right? That smoke, the illusion of
Yeah, they didn't want to be lost in the forest. They want to find center and then go from
right,
there.
right. So, and I make the argument that I'm going to use the same analogy that you just made, being lost in the forest. Should always have a lighter whether you smoke or don't smoke, because you'll never know when your ability to cut something or to start a fire could mean the difference between life and death. So you should always have a knife, and you should always carry a lighter. And then if you're lost in the forest, you don't have to wander from tree to tree. You're smart. You build a fire that you can manage and maintain without destroying the forest.
Right.
And now you can signal to virtually anybody, here I am, come and find me.
Yeah, you also illuminate the map around you when you bring in that light.
Right.
Like this conceptual light, this idea where you can know for certainty. Well, I'm saying certainty with air quotes, though.
Within the limits of how certain you can actually be, which is almost like next to nothing.
I find that really funny because in this time of uncertainty that you're talking about with these characters that are like very into cynicism, I'm sure a lot of it was to go against the state. Like,
well,
state.
they clearly state that it wasn't. It was a state that was a hierarchy. It was dominated by a king, right, and priests, the temple, and then the multitude of gods that they worship, right? So
yeah, imagine having an argument with somebody and they throw reasoning and you press them on it, and all they have is like approximate beliefs. It's not even, oh, I firmly believe this. It's like, well, it might be this god or it might be Neptune.
Okay, so again, it's an interesting point that you bring up. So the Cynics, the reason they existed was they rose up, right, again, in the face of something that they saw as being unnatural. So having like kings who were ruling by divine right, and they were supported by a priestly class who endorsed their right to rule because whatever multitude of gods they worshipped also supported their choice, right? So you could see, to me, this seems reasonable that something like this would occur. But again, I just take issue with their behaviors. I go, how are you any different than the thing that you oppose if you're behaving in that way, right? I know better.
It's funny. The best they could do is find like I don't want to say the best they can do because I haven't looked at it like with intensity. But if you think about it, they wanted to find a closer approximation for the truth, and they thought that was a good process
in a natural way, right? Like that, their emphasis was always that it should be natural, that you don't have to force it, and then perhaps that's what they saw. The way we organize in societies, kings and queens and priests and all that stuff as being unnatural and forcing that kind of illusion of order with the smoke, right?
Yeah, because you ask one of these people, or if you ask like a royalty, like, oh, hey, why are you in charge of my life and my family, my friends? 'Cause my mom had sex with the king and she pooped me out and now I rule you. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
No, but it seems ridiculous. It's like, what? This monkey's smarter than me because I'm a different monkey and I'm from a different lineage of monkeys? What the fuck?
Well, again, it's not unreasonable to question why we do those things, and that's the problem. When it's absolute that's driving everything, there's no room for questions, particularly questions that challenge power structures and that sort of thing. And we see it today in contemporary society. The ability, them exercising the power to silence voices that institutions don't agree with. right? And it's the institution that's doing it. And then that way, because it's the institution, you can't blame any one individual. But now, even in the public political spectrum, you see the political pundits behaving that way. And they're outing themselves all the time, right? And you go like, wait a minute, this guy thinks that he's right and that we're all wrong. And somehow he knows better. Well, again, what did he use to determine that other than the obvious, his ego, his conceit, right? So, or theirs, right? That somehow they know better, and that everybody should be just towing the line because it's what's best for everyone, which is what they say, but the reality is probably more likely what's best for them.
Right. It's strange. The people who are in position of authority, they'll, assuming they're highly educated and they know what they're talking about, they're going to be right a lot of the time. But there's going to be a lot of times where they think, maybe I shouldn't speak on this topic.
Well, I don't. Well, here's the thing. It's interesting that you point that out. The assumption is that they're all intelligent and they have some kind of an intelligent opinion or understanding of whatever the subject at hand is, and the fact of the matter is they're all well educated, but they're educated as lawyers, so they're masters of rhetoric. So
right.
So their intellectual capacity is about arguing to convince you of their position, the correctness of their position. Well, I'm going that kind of because that favors bias, that kind of dispels their position. It actually renders their intelligence as being like something that you should be suspicious of.
Yeah, and it's like, let's say this guy represents vets, but he's not a vet, like a veterinarian. And he goes to a zoo, and he's like, I don't like this zoologist, I'm going to fire him. And this shit happens all the time simply because they're at that point of authority.
Right.
Which is so strange, because it should be open dialogue.
Well, in a place of where you favor understanding, dialogue's always the way to go. And you're not arguing to win, or you're not arguing to win the conversation. You're arguing to determine greater degrees of understanding. But if you're not interested in understanding, then what are you arguing for? Well, you're arguing in service of your bias and to convince others that you are indeed correct and that they should favor what you're saying, right? So this is why the Cynics rose, and this is where eudaimonia, which is human flourishing, this is how the Cynics defined it, and it's the idea of self-sufficiency and equanimity, which means mental calmness and composure and evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. And what do you see how politicians react? Emotionally, they become impassioned. These guys, the Cynics, to them, that betrayed your position. That the moment that you became impassioned and emotional in the way that you responded, that you were probably in the wrong, right? So another, like again, even though it wasn't a doctrine, these are the principles of it. So human flourishing, which is self-sufficiency, and then there's equanimity, which is mental calmness, and there's arete, which is excellence of virtue and the full realization of potential or inherent function by being or a thing. So I know that's the proper dictionary definition, but arete is really about the realization of your own potential. And you can only realize your potential by evolution of your intellectual capacities, demonstrating wisdom, being self-sufficient, having equanimity, that you're emotionally mature, you don't react emotionally to any kind of arguments, that what you're trying to do is what's the truth. So you can, to me, you can encapsulate all that into objectivity. And then the last principle would be parrhesia, which is boldness of freedom of speech, right? So that you speak honestly, you don't hold back the truth, that you're unafraid of what the truth may do. There's a quote by Carl Sagan: "If it can be destroyed by the truth, it deserves to be destroyed by the truth." So that's a true Cynic way of looking at everything, right? And so the position that I personally take is that objectivity encapsulates all these things, right? And it does require you to speak openly, to be able to engage in a difficult, awkward conversation and not lose step, not be thrown off by the subject matter. That you're honest and you demonstrate a clear calmness and lucid intellectual capacity when you're doing that. In doing that, now you're demonstrating real intelligence, right? And that only exists in the moment. That it can only exist because you're objective in the way that you perceive the moment, right? So all these things come to bear in the moment.
It seems like a lot of these principles still have an opening where it allows you to be wrong and then not treat it as if it's a bad thing but part of the process. Like, it seems like it's kind of like talked around, but it's not that being right is like
it's not about being right for the sake of validating your biases.
Oh, I wasn't going that way.
No. I know. I'm just saying that's the opposite of what you're talking about. It's about the attempt to understand what is good. So maybe right might be the wrong word. What is good and what represents the highest understanding, and then out of that understanding, then you see the truth of what's really going on.
Yeah, like,
right?
It allows you to be wrong in an attempt to find greater truth at the opposite side of the table. Because this whole thing is about open discussion and then learning truth and supportive evidence if you have it.
Right.
If you don't have it, then you go, okay,
well, then,
this is a bias.
Right. And again, it doesn't mean that subjectivity isn't worthy of exploration, but it just means that there's no evidence to support it. So I'm okay. Shit, the entire premise of this channel is us just talking shit about any given subject, and then just exploring the subject verbally. We're not I'm not producing tons of evidence to support what I'm saying. All I'm doing is presenting information and then exploring it, and then trying to do it in an even-handed way, so you go here, not one way or the other. This is the information, and then now it's left to you, the individual, to make of it what you will, right? So right. It's more value in the individual coming to their own conclusions. Why do you think we always start the channel with that statement? The idea is like, it doesn't matter what we think or what we're saying. We're just talking.
Right.
Right.
Like, you can disagree with the definitions, but the fact you're sharing the definitions, that's very important.
Well, we both are, right? Like, but we're both engaged in the conversation. And I'm like, look, if you spend the majority of your time talking about other social influencers and social media and the weather, your favorite sports team, the color of lipstick, wasted energy. This is the kind of conversation that you could be having, which is way more engaging, forces you to think, and challenges ideas that you hold dear that might not be founded in anything. And I'll be real frank with you. I love nothing more to discover that I'm wrong, because then it shows me I need to rethink everything, or I need to approach this maybe perhaps differently, right? Because I didn't have access to all the available information, so I couldn't make an informed choice. So being wrong means that now that I can self-correct, and I can make a better informed choice. Right? All of us can.
Do you find it interesting when you're self-correcting that you're like realizing the pattern of thoughts you have, like you follow the method of how you came to that conclusion given that information? and then how that
Okay,
changed.
so yeah, okay, so I follow my own. Okay, what I'll do is I'll die if I come across a piece of information that challenges everything I know. I follow my line of reasoning to the point where, like, here, where did it split or divert into a different direction that was incorrect versus something that was maybe more appropriate, and then I'll make the effort to integrate that new insight into like my greater line of reasoning or the way that I'm thinking, right? So I favor reason, rational thinking, and logic, and without it being informed by emotions or any form of subjectivity or bias. I like to come at things open and objectively, right? Because this way, it means that there's less likely that you're going to make errors. It's not a guarantee. It just helps to minimize how many you're going to make.
Right, because like I think most people, without thinking, they almost assign a degree of fallibility to an idea. Like, oh, I can know about this, or I know of it. Like it's
Right.
this idea of separation.
So I think that, like, for many of us, we don't ask for evidence. If it sounds reasonable, we just go with it, and it's usually how compelling whoever's sharing the information, like how compelling they may be.
Right.
That's why I tell people, you shouldn't be believing me. You should figure this shit out for yourself, right? Like, all I'm doing is, all that we do every time we record one of these is we're kind of going, here, have a look here, take a look at this. What do you think? Right?
Well, that's what I like about this, especially because the definitions are there. We try to really just squeeze the hell out of this idea for our own. Well, you're a lot more objective than I am. I'm relating it to what comes across my mind, like what's the most immediate thing that seems important to relate to it. For example, when we're going through all this stuff, my first thought is like, yeah, they knew they were in a cult. We know we're in a cult here. So why are we listening to a guy on a TV who's saying, "Oh, you have to pay this specific tax," but
and we're gonna get a raise, and we're doing it for the benefit of you.
Oh, no, that's not even the best part. Like sorry, I guess this is off topic.
It doesn't matter.
When it comes to cynicism, let's just talk about, hey, they said there's this tax and it refunds you this much money. How does that work? Are you making money off tax? Tax doesn't work like that. They took a large portion of your earnings. They gave you back a large portion of what they didn't want out of those earnings, and they called it what do they call it? You know what I'm referring to, right? No, but
I thought you were talking about the carbon tax.
No, I am. So they've been saying for a long time, oh, you get this much in rebates. If you take away this proposal, people aren't going to get money. It's like you're taking money from them and giving it to other people.
I think their ultimate failure is no matter how much they rationalize the choice to do it.
Right.
People will feel the pinch in their pocketbook.
Yeah.
So that, and then them selling the idea that somehow that, like, it all works out. We're going to take from you in advance, but you get it back. Well, that's kind of dishonest, right? And it becomes a way then to again rationalize their very specific bias, right? And then it might have been credible right up until they were like, oh, and we're going to all experience we're all getting a pay raise in conjunction with this increase in tax. I'm like, okay, and here's the thing. I'm astounded that they must think of us as being fairly stupid, and that the cost, this represents a significant increase in the cost of living, because now everything goes up in cost because it has to accommodate now this new tax.
Yeah.
Plus they want to plus all these institutions want to maintain the level of profit that they experience. So what does that translate into? Everything becomes more expensive. Well,
Yeah.
you're not currying favor or winning people over, and it doesn't matter what line of bullshit you're shoveling. Like ultimately, the rationalization is just you justifying your position. I'll be real frank with you. I'm surprised that anybody pays any attention to politicians anymore. They're all lying, thieving bastards, and if you doubt me, just watch the evening news. Right now, having gotten away from the cynics, uh, remember, I put the idea forward that the cynics arose as a countermeasure to the way that in ancient Greece they organized their societies. So why shouldn't there be cynics today who rise in the face of the conventions of our modern day societies, right? Where most politicians exercise absolute authority and absolute power, and then we're the peons who have to do as we're told, right? So
I'd make a bad cynic. I got really invested in that
yeah,
that topic.
you can't be emotionally involved in this stuff. It will lead to the most extreme kind of reaction.
Right.
That's what emotions do. They're an inducement to get you to act. The problem is that if you, in conjunction with like stress and anxiety, it produces like an extreme response, and that's the last thing you want. You're not going to move forward by becoming more crazed and impassioned. What you need to do is you need to be more at ease, and you come at everything from a relaxed position. Because what you're ultimately what will serve everybody best is a level-headed thinking, an evenness in temperament, a mental clarity, lucidity. Right? These are the things that, and you will only experience them when you train to be objective, which is another way of saying to be in the present, right? And we've discussed this at length. We're going to go through this again, not too distant future. We will, like, in a more deep way, cover subjectivity and objectivity, and then train how you're trained for one versus the other, right? So, but that's a topic for another time. So, so this. So here, in closing with the Cynics, I just want to say this, that Diogenes lived as a beggar, and not by doing any kind of form of labor. It means deliberately, if part of being a cynic means deliberately choosing a hard life. And cynics practice shamelessness or impudence in defiance of society's laws, customs, social conventions that people take for granted. To me, I don't see the value in being impoverished. And I'll bet you if you ask anybody who's homeless, given a choice, they'd rather not be homeless, right? So it's not, to me, it's not, it's kind of obvious. Right, but the fact that they chose to do this that's how defiant they were of society. And I'm like, there's an alternative, and the alternative is homelessness, and then homelessness is subsistence level living. You fail to meet the basic needs, and you die. So I don't see the value in that. I do see the value and pointing out the failures in the conventions, the laws, and this very society that you live in. It's important. It's a you want a better balanced society, you need cynics, people to point out where the society is failing, where its shortcomings are, and so that it can be given the opportunity to correct, right? Because you can't legislate a better society. And the lawmakers can't make more laws to make society better. The only way you're going to get there is for people to come into their own. And you're not doing it through subjectivity. We've been trapped by it since our earliest recorded history. And only a small outlier groups, and typically they were monks, cultivated objectivity, but they did it as a result of the way they lived. So quiet contemplation, meditation, it gave them access to objectivity, which is another way of, more or less, of saying wisdom.
I feel like the cynics that fail their goal is when they become so extreme into this idea of cynicism that they end up like Diogenes, like you say, just absolutely homeless. It's not the home that makes you like the king or like whoever reports or purports this like big structure. It's just a house. You can live in it and still be a cynic. You can still be free.
I would say that, yes, I would say that the cynics shouldn't have chosen to ignore their basic needs. That those are things that you have to meet, and the idea then becomes meeting your basic needs, and then attempting to strive to have greater depths and lengths of understanding, right? So that it's a juggling thing. You have to juggle those requirements for basic needs, meeting your basic needs, and then to try and elevate yourself and realize all your potentials and to be objective. You got to be a juggler, and it's work, right? And they took these. I hate to say this about Diogenes, but he took the easy out. It was just way better to spend all your time being a drunk and a lout, and it doesn't mean that he wasn't intelligent or that he didn't have great insights.
Yeah, they regard him as a very intelligent person.
Right, but the way he chose to look after his life was, you'll forgive the pun, piss poor, right?
Maybe he's just really good at marketing because we're still talking about him.
I think it's just because he was so paradoxical and controversial. I think that's why we're still talking about him.
I agree, yeah.
Right? So the Cynic way of life, and here's the weird thing about the Cynics, they generally agreed that their way of life required continuous training and not just in exercising judgments and mental impressions, but physical training as well, which I dare say, like the most notable among them didn't do that. So, and this is why I always make the argument that part of the struggle is always to find balance, to unify mind, body, and spirit. That these things are worthy of your consideration, and then as a result of the consideration, then you find a way to honor those things and to bring them into balance or union, right? That's what could be more purposeful to an existence, right? So, but a nihilist would be like, what's the point? Well, the point is that you experience now greater degrees of self-realization, that you become this incredibly high expression of who you are, right? We're only here temporarily, then maybe the point is to make the most of it, right?
That definitely would accept a lot of the terms that you get with like nihilism, pessimism. Well, not pessimism, because it directly wants to go to the negative route. Whereas like with cynicism, you can accept that there's a nihilist perspective that may make sense, but it's not. It's not. I forget the word, but it doesn't mesh well. Because you think about all the things that you have to regard as important. It's like,
yeah, that you can't approach this. You have to. Every aspect of what you are is worthy of your consideration and time. So that means you have to devote not just time to think about it, but then you have to act in that capacity. You need food. You need a place to sleep. In Canada, the winters are brutal. How homeless people survive just astounds me. Like I have the highest respect for them, that they're able to function and survive in this, and I can't imagine that it's easy in any way, right? So, and to me, it's the most shameful thing and saddening thing about the way that we organize as a society, that we have individuals who have unlimited wealth or obscene amounts of wealth, and then we have people living in the streets. I go, to me, it's the ultimate expression of our stupidity, right? We are a mockery of who we are, right?
Yeah, you ever go to the grocery store and they're like, would you like to donate $1 to a starving kid? And it's like, wait, for $1 I could save a kid. You're in a giant company. Why don't you donate like $1
Well,
million?
you know why? Because this is how smart they are. They'll take your donations and then they go, we Sobeys, or I shouldn't choose any institution, so please ignore that.
Yeah, those people are great. They never done
Yeah,
anything wrong.
every institution that out there that's collecting it, they collect it in their name. So then when they give to charity, that money that you gave, they're the ones who are are claiming that it is their charity, right? Right. So and then they probably get some kind of like tax write off too, right? So they do it in their own name, but you're the one who's actually providing the money. So the charity is not from them; it's from the people who go to their prospective businesses, right? So
Yeah, there's all sorts of ways to look at it, but it's kind of dead horse. You can't kick it too much. Like this point,
can't
it goes
lead
endlessly.
you can't lead a dead horse to water.
No, I was thinking that expression like "don't kick a dead horse," because like
I've never even heard that expression.
serious?
You don't kick a dead horse; it's dead. What's the point of kicking it?
Exactly. Like we don't need to talk about how corrupt these
Oh, right,
institutions
right.
are. Like at length, everybody knows at this point.
So the Cynics, their practice of virtue was that one person is or that without training the body and the mind, then without health and vigor, then those things are necessary to be able to participate in good and it depends on you, training mind and body, right? So you want to access virtues, you can only do that way. But again, this is where Cynics tend to be hypocritical because and I remember Athens at that time, like they favored physical ability. That's why they had gymnasiums. You think gymnasiums are a modern day invention? The idea was to train your mind and your body. So they had universities and they had places to go train physically, to physically condition yourself. So that's part of the struggle to unify mind, body, and spirit. Right? And if you're not engaging the body, you're neglecting a third of who you are. It's just that simple. And for the Cynics, the idea of practicing and training mind and body would lead to virtues, right? Like that's what would make you virtuous, right? So again, it's the kind of thing that I find most interesting. My favorite quote from Diogenes, well, first, the Cynics are said to have invented the idea of cosmopolitanism, right? The idea that you can have not just societies but cities where you have integration of and representation of all these different groups, and that's what makes for a healthy city and society, right? I love this quote from Diogenes. So when he was asked where he came from, Diogenes replied he was a citizen of the world, right? So and it's often something that I say, right? That I don't like. Geographically, I live in Canada, but I don't recognize the boundaries. They're lines on pictures. They're not real. It's we live on a fucking planet that's not divided, right? It's only divided in our minds. So it speaks to how well controlled we are, right? And again, so I would offer up the idea that we are one family. So either we're all one, we're all connected, or we're all separate. And so in the modern interpretation of society nationally and internationally, it seems to favor separateness, right? Because that's division, right? And the rationale is probably because in the division they're able to maintain greater degrees of control Oh my God. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thanks.
I was gonna say we passed the 1 hour mark, but I'm fine to keep going.
Yeah, we're not done. We just finished with the Cynics. And I just wanted to comment on contemporary cynicism. Now,
Can I throw something in?
yeah, sure, go ahead.
One thing I hate about like the intellectualism I see out there is like it's because they use rationalization to push towards this idea of materialism. So like they
Which is
know
just
the-
but it's just a reflection of their biases. That's why they rationalize. They
right,
are,
like these people that look at the map, they'll see the borders and they'll think, oh, it's very important we have those borders because we're so distinctly different than that group. It's like, no, our laws are distinctly different than that group. Over time, that might change us, but it doesn't change.
and there are differences in our cultures. Like, look, I'm not saying that you shouldn't recognize geographical locations. I'm not even saying that you shouldn't divide up the planet in the way that we do, like with borders and stuff.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that you shouldn't be treating them with value, right? Again, it's just demonstration of a bias.
Yeah.
So those lines, they're just so if you're talking to somebody in India and they go, "Where are you from?" You can say, "Well, Canada," more specifically Alberta, more specifically Calgary. You go right down to the street. That's a convenience.
Right.
And it's a convenient way to sort of like give position to where you are versus where someone else is. So those regional differences are, again, not really meaningful, but I don't want to assign any importance to them other than that here it just makes it easier to say, well, here I came, this is where originally I'm from. You don't want to say it was this mountain spot.
Right. Under the tree shade of that tree.
Right. So you need to identify where it is. But this goes back to what I've said about any kind of identity. It is not meaningful other than as a reference point. So in that capacity, yes. But you're none of those things should be invested with significance beyond the fact that it's a reference point. You just so you know where someone happens to be at any given moment of time or where they came from.
That has some really meta implications.
Implications?
Yeah, that has some like really meta implications for language itself. Because if you think about it, there's different languages for sure.
Yeah, but most of them, you can trace roots from any language anywhere on the planet. You can trace roots to other regions. So they all, to a degree, they're all interrelated. They're not all exactly the same, right? But they all relate to one another. So again, it's another regional difference, so that you're able to identify where something comes from.
Right.
But that's it. It's a reference point. So the failures treating it as though somehow it's more important. And thanks to the British Empire, a majority of the planet speaks English, right? So and still to this day. So English has become probably one of the most commonly spoken languages, and Spanish probably being number one, I would say. But again, these are just they're tools of communication, right? It's all language is. So, and then the idea is that tool is used to convey ideas, which is what we're doing, and we do it in the regional language of the region that we come from.
Right.
But is it important? No, I don't treat it with any real value. It just happens to be that my language of proficiency is English.
Right. Like I thought it was funny. I had to bring up that it's very ambiguous, because it really does get to a meta level if you want to think about it. Like, oh, I'm talking about a tree, but I'm talking about a Canadian tree. My friend who's in Veracruz, he's talking about like a Spanish tree.
Okay,
so Mexican tree.
All right. So does a maple tree that's in Canada is any different than a maple tree that's in the U.S.?
No. I mean, it's different than the tree beside it too.
Well, they're different. They're unique unto themselves.
Right.
But a maple tree is a maple tree.
Right.
It's the point I'm trying to make. And if you come from Veracruz, Mexico, because of the geographical difference and the climate differences, it's different kinds of trees, right? So again, it's real easy to get caught up in the minutia. But the point ultimately is that a tree is a tree is a tree.
Right.
And some are more specifically adapted to more arid environments, some are colder environments. So, again, those distinctions, those minute distinctions, are always meant to be a reference point. So, again, to foster greater degrees of understanding. It's all about understanding, right? And most people would never go there. That's not what they're thinking. They're thinking about servicing their subjective biases, the things that they prefer, their preferences, right? And in pursuit of the requirements of their social conditioning, which is an extension of the society, the culture they live in, all that stuff, and the media and all that stuff. So that's what drives most people. And all I'm trying to say is that you can have different motivations. You can be driven by different things, but it requires you then to open your mind to different things and the ability to see things differently, right? Remember, I always cite the example. It's always about perception. So if you think that your perceptions are spot on all the time and you know exactly what's going on, remember, you think you're sitting there still when the planet's spinning from as little as 300 miles an hour to as much as 1,000, right? But your perception is that you are perfectly still. Right? Couldn't be further from the truth. So then what other perceptions do you have that are incorrect and erroneous? Probably way more than you imagine.
That's what makes cynicism so beautiful when you compare it to materialism, because materialism is like, oh, there's a thing, it has properties, it falls in certain categories. Cynicism seems to be more like, there's a degree of knowledge that I can know. Let's see how close to the line we can go.
Okay,
it's comfortable with losing.
Okay, so again, there's different degrees of cynicism, right? Like the cynicism of the ancient Greeks is different from the contemporary cynicism, which is often characterized by general distrust of the motives of others. May have a general lack of faith or hope in people, motivated by ambition, desire, greed, gratification, materialism, goals, opinions that a cynic perceives as vain, unobtainable, or ultimately meaningless. So everything that society gears you to be is unnatural, and the original cynics lived to point that out. Their purpose was to show that there was a better and more natural way of doing it. Contemporary cynicism is darker because it's more about the loathing of everything and the impotence that one experiences in loathing society and all of its conventions because they can't do anything about it.
Right, which I would associate more with nihilism.
It's not nihilism specifically. It's just
Right.
they feel disempowered.
Right.
Right. So they can be more pessimistic, which is like you see the worst in everything. Right.
The funny thing is, when I think about cynical people, like who describe themselves as cynical nowadays, it's not the classical cynical like you were referring to.
Right. It's contemporary cynicism.
Yeah, it's these people who feel like disinterested, not integrated into like what they enjoy doing, so they're not really having a 1-to-1 ratio with the experience. They're just absolutely pissy.
Yeah, and they don't have. And here's the rub: you don't have to be. Right, like everything that they may cite may very well be true, but the question then becomes, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? And the fact is, they don't do anything about it because you could elevate yourself. Society is what it is, and you're not changing it. right? And you can't produce enough legalism to make it better. You just drown everybody in more bureaucracy. But as the individual, you can rise to the highest expression of who you are. And contemporary cynics, they don't see that as an option because they like feeling like shit. They like their misery. You know why? Because subjectively speaking, there's comfort in it.
Yeah, the familiarity.
Right.
It's sad because you think about the rationalization they're doing. It's to a point where they're like saying, "Hey, I'm uncomfortable with this idea that I'm allowed to be happy," or
that they've never even made an attempt to find things, to that would make them feel like whole and satisfied and empowered. You have the capacity to explore things that would do that for you or provide you that as an individual. But and I know how much of a trap life can be. Like everything requires the ability to find it. So that's why it's a struggle, right? You struggle to realize the wholeness of who you are. You struggle to balance your your basic needs versus realizing the potentials that exist within you. But anything worth doing is work. And most of us fear that because that it requires like an ongoing, consistent level of commitment. It's just easier to sit around and get high and drunk all the time. I'm sorry, but they resort to convenience. It's just easier to be a shitty person than to elevate myself to the highest expression of who I could be. That's work. But it's work that's worth your time. And then what do you get out of it in the end? An enormous sense of satisfaction. You'll feel good about being you.
it's definitely better than the modern intellectualism and rationality, or not rationality, rationalization. Words get complicated. But yeah, no, it's a lot better than this idea that, oh, I know everything and it all sucks and I'm just going to go drink with my friends and then I'm going to die at 50 an alcoholic.
Well, the idea is then they just seek pleasures for pleasure's sake to try and like not feel shitty. The problem is that ultimately becomes its own trap, right? This is why you have to favor the hard work, the discipline. You have to be willing to do that. So the hardship that they took on by living as beggars, the original Cynics in Athens, it was a means by which they could purge themselves, right? Purify themselves. It was that hardship. Now, I don't agree with the way that they did it. The hardship that I think is worth doing is where you commit yourself to learning, training, and then you go and do that shit. You show up every day. You show up. You get your ass to the gym. You go to the dojo. Whatever. You start taking courses. You start reading books. Do everything you can to elevate yourself, to learn, to grow, right? As an individual, that hardship is the one that's worthwhile.
The other type of cynicism where you just let things go, there's no growth. It's this idea of like, slowly eating away at the problems will fix the problems. Whereas what you're describing with your cynicism is there's objective realities that are better and we can work towards them.
Yeah.
That's fundamentally what humans need to believe. Like, right. There's no way you shouldn't believe
you don't have to believe it. It's an objective truth. Because the choice is separateness or wholeness, oneness. That's what you're choosing between, right? So if you don't like the expression of society as it is and the way that it's organized and what it does to you, which is to create division and separateness, then there's only one alternative. You take on the work to elevate the self, and then you promote unity, not just within yourself, but outside yourself. Balance, understanding, right? These are the things that are great. So I want to move on to Stoic, and it arose out of cynicism. right? So a member of the school of philosophy founded by Zeno of Citium about 300 before the Common Era, BCE, holding that the wise man should be free from passion, unmoved by joy or grief, and submissive to natural law. Right? So that's almost word for word right out of the Cynics' view of what the wise man should be. Right? So you're free from your, so it's another way of saying free from your subjective self. It's not that you don't have your subjective self, that you stop treating that subjective part of you with any kind of significance. And then in doing that, you'll demonstrate emotional maturity, right? You won't be impassioned, and you won't be moved by like negative emotions, and you submit to the natural law. Well, what's the natural law? Everything's connected, and you know that you don't have to force things. There's a natural way to do everything. So when they say natural law, I interpret it to mean that you don't force things to happen, right? Not forcing things to happen, which organized society to a degree enforces that you must follow these guidelines, that you must be. Being Stoic is suddenly separating yourself, distinguishing yourself by not being trapped by your subjective self.
Right, because the culture we live in, like everybody lives in, there's going to be that degree of, what's the word for it? Conditioning. Whereas if you learn to condition yourself towards being detached from the ego, not necessarily that you can completely remove ego, it's just...
You change the nature of your relationship with it. Like here's the thing. So when they talk about like eliminating your ego, you're not getting rid of it.
No, it holds on to you forever. You let go of it.
Right. You change the nature of your relationship. It no longer motivates you. Right. Look, one of the most motivating things is either pleasure or pain. Those can be incredibly motivating to individuals. Right. So being trapped in those is an unnatural state, like where you're only servicing that. And what do we and where do we live? We live in a society that you either rewarded by material gain or you're punished, right? Well, that's pleasure. That's the pleasure and pain thing. So again, we're being all socially conditioned by that, and it further divides us, right? So. The Stoic logic is not reacting to things out of passion or feeling, right? That you're not, even though emotions are inducement to act, that you demonstrate emotional maturity. You don't assign value to the feelings that you're having. And if you're somebody who's prone to doing that, then every time you have a potent feeling or sensation, you will act on it. And typically if it's a negative one, then your action will be a reaction. You won't choose an appropriate course of action. You'll just simply react. And that can always be problematic, right? It can lead to violence, which again, the only time you should ever be acting violently is under the threat of a clear and present danger, like your life's absolutely at risk. Then you act. That's when you're supposed to act, right? But the rest of the time, you don't need to be engaged like that. You can approach everything, dispassionately, objectively, where you see things for what they are. And then instead of reacting, you can plot a course of action and then choose that course of action, right?
This would help you avoid extremisms.
100%.
Because, like, you think of this idea of the useful idiot, this, I forget who put it forward, but it's this idea that you can be as intellectually,
Look, the highest intellects are prone to rationalization. You know why they're prone to rationalization? They're not stupid people. They're so clever that they argue and they argue quite effectively in defense of their biases and preferences. And they try to, and not only are they arguing to like justify them, they're also arguing to try and get others to adopt their thinking, and they're signaling, they're letting them, hey, look, see how good I am, see, look at my reasoning, you should be thinking like this too. And and they're in the highest positions of authority within academia. And how do you think they behave? Here's a fair way to in entertainment, movies and television, whenever highest academics are ever presented, how are they typically characterized? Nose in the air, yeah. Arrogant, self-serving sons of bitches. So either that's because it's a great trope for entertainment, or there might be some truth to that.
I think they're genuinely some of the people that are like most ready for extremism if there's like a situation that pushes on their specific issues, like
or pushes against their biases. I would agree, and I think that then they feel compelled to not only defend their position, but to exercise whatever powers they have within their position to eliminate opposition, right? And that's what a well-conditioned consumer and competitor would do. It's no less. So you've got that. It just amplifies their biases, right?
Yeah, that definitely terrifies me in some situations. Like, it could go really wrong.
Well, like I said, it really is. Subjectivity draws out the worst of what we are. And they're intelligent people. You would think that because they're intelligent, they would be more objective and then therefore demonstrate greater degrees of wisdom and discernment and be more even-handed and balanced. But we discover that it's a mixed bag, that a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are ego-driven. They're self-important, right? And they're right up until they retire. And then when they're retired, they don't know what to do with themselves because now they're no longer important.
So like the authority was the thing that fucking mattered. Like,
right.
That's so stupid.
Right. And then what do? Then they spend the rest of their lives like basically torturing anyone because they don't know how else to live. Right?
I mean,
and when I mean torturing, I mean not physically torturing them. Well, they could get into yoga, they could golf for fuck's sakes. But instead, now they spend all the time gossiping or getting involved in like the rumor mill or some shit like that.
That's what I'm concerned. Politics,
childish behavior. Why? It's childish behavior. It's the worst of subjectivity in a very public light. That's it, right? So Stoicism is defined as the endurance of pain or hardship without display of feelings or without complaint. That you endure it and you go, here, I understand the value, and I'm not gonna concede defeat to hardship, right? Or pain. That I'm gonna rise above it. I'm the one who's in charge. What a foreign idea to most people. Oh, your pain's real. Come see the doctor so you can get all the meds you need to resolve your pain. Without addressing the source. Right? There's greater value in you constantly sedating yourself. Right? So, the ancient Greek school of philosophy founded at Athens by Zeno of Citium, the school taught that virtue, the highest good, is based on knowledge. The wise live in harmony with divine reason, or with the natural order of things. You can, that they don't force it; they flow naturally with reality, with the world around them. They don't force it to be something. They become the surfer riding the wave instead of the guy with the sledgehammer smashing things, get in their way. Right? Does it make sense?
Yeah. I'm thinking of different examples.
What?
Yeah, sorry, it's just where my brain naturally goes.
No, it's okay. So they're indifferent to the vicissitudes, that changes of circumstances, fortune typically one that is unwelcome or unpleasant. So they don't demonstrate fear of an unwelcome or an unpleasant change or pain. They don't. They accept those things as, like, if it's occurring, then it's what's happening. So now the question becomes, what do you do? What's the appropriate course of action now? You can only determine that objectively or stoically, right? You can't come at it from driven by emotion or by your preferences or your biases or subjectivity. It requires objectivity. And you cultivate that. You train for that, right? Sorry, hardship. You agree to the hardship, right?
If you're in a position you can't escape, if you're at least, it sounds bad, but if you're using the modern definition of cynical, like the way people think about it, it sounds weird saying this, but if you're in a place where you can't escape, the best thing you can do is just accept it and then go, okay, where can I go from here?
Right.
But like the modern cynics would be like, oh, I can't believe I'm stuck in jail breaking rocks. I'm so pissed, and their whole day is just filled with anger.
Right. So it really is about how you choose your perception. You can endure. You can go. I can agree to this hardship and see it as a way of elevating myself, or you can succumb to it and then express nothing but dissatisfaction. Right? That's an emotional response. You're venting. Don't vent. Just do something about it. Right? So Stoicism is a school of Hellenistic philosophy that flourished throughout ancient Greece and ancient Rome. The Romans loved it, so they adopted it too. And Marcus Aurelius, I don't know if you've ever, he's a famous Stoic, right? If you go into Food for Thought, any of the Food for Thoughts, there's a bunch of Marcus Aurelius quotes that I used in Food for Thought. And he's again, a brilliant Stoic who some academics say he might have been a borderline nihilist, right? But he promoted Stoic ideas, right? He was like one of the 5 great emperors of ancient Rome, because they're only it existed for 1,000 years, and only 5 of them, historically speaking, were cited as being great individuals, and Marcus Aurelius was one who was more philosopher than emperor, right? Although he's probably an interesting blend of the two, right? So Zenon of Citium, he lived from 334 BCE to 262 BCE, and was the Hellenistic philosopher. Who was originally from Cyprus, and he was the founder of the Stoic school of philosophy, which taught in Athens around 300 BCE, and based on the moral ideas of the Cynics, right? So it came from, the idea was borrowed from, those ideas were borrowed by the Cynics, or from the Cynics. And Stoicism places great emphasis on goodness, peace of mind, gained from living a life of virtue in accordance with nature. It proved very popular and flourished as a major school of philosophy right to the end of the Roman era, and then was revived in the Renaissance as Neo-Stoicism, and then in the current era as modern Stoicism, because there's a lot of people who they align with this, they see the value in this, but they don't understand the how of it. Being a Stoic, being unmoved by your emotions, you can't just simply say I'm unmoved by my emotions. Then the struggle then is to come to terms with them. But I would offer that you can train to that end. And how do you train to that end? Meditation, because meditation essentially it's exercise for the human nervous system. So, and it trains the nervous system to be present in the current moment. And there's a whole host of values we're going to go into, and it's a separate topic, but we're going to explore it more deeply at another time. But that's essentially how you would train then so that you could demonstrate things characterized as being Stoic, so virtue and connection with all things, not forcing things, right? Stoic ethics, the foundation, good lies in the state of the soul itself, and wisdom and self-control. And you can only achieve that kind of a relationship with yourself through training to be objective, present in the current moment, right? That's what produces it. So it would allow for you then to live in such a way. And then where you would place, where you placed highest value on reason, using logic and understanding, these would become primary, right? These would be the things that drives the individual, that you as a human being don't have to be a slave. Remember, if you can train to be objective, then you can also be conditioned to amplify your subjectivity. So if you live in a society that favors competition and self-interest and consumption, that all these things are conditioning your nervous system. And then your behaviors under that, so where you place greater emphasis on my team, tribalism, all this stuff fosters greater degrees of subjectivity, right? So then it's training your nervous system so that you are distracted, so you will react emotionally, so you will be reactionary. And the only cure for this modern dilemma is to train to be objective. And the only method I'm aware of that you can do that is meditation. And it leads to someone being stoic.
I was going to say that that cycle you're talking about also is like self-reaffirming, not in the positive way, but it's like, hey, I've joined this tribe, I have to agree with them. Not only because if I disagree with them, they'll kick me out, but because then I have to reason out why I was wrong following that group.
So now you're reacting to fear, pain,
yeah.
right? And remember, subjectivity, which is bias, selfishness, self-interest, it leads to suffering, and it starts out of fear and pain, and that leads to anger and hate, and then those lead to suffering. And that's why you suffer. That's why subjectivity is at the root and is the cause of every single individual's suffering. The pain is unavoidable. The suffering is entirely optional. You don't have to suffer, not a single goddamn day, right? But that's on you. You got to then take on the hardship, the work, the willingness to train yourself, to unify your mind, body, and spirit, to train to be present, the here and now, to be objective, to be stoic. Right, so does that all make sense now? Does the argument come around in a complete circle?
I believe so, because if you think about subjectivity, it's not that it's wrong to be subjective, but when it guides... Well, it can guide, but you can't force yourself out of subjectivity to act a certain way. It's better to use objectivity.
Right.
Subjectivity can lead to amazing things that make you happy and experiencing it. I'm not saying following it.
Subjectivity can allow for you to have a more unique expression of you as an individual, but only because you don't treat your subjectivity with value. Right? So you change the nature of your relationship with your subjectivity, which is, again, another byproduct of meditation, because you can't help, by becoming more objective, then you change the nature of the relationship that you have with your own subjectivity.
Right, you still have subjectivity.
Right. Your biases and preferences don't go away. You still have them.
Well,
but you don't treat them with value.
What I'm saying is the enjoyment you get during not when you're thinking through subjectivity, but when you're experiencing life, and you're like, oh,
I'm having my favorite ice cream. I'm having a banana split.
Right.
I love banana splits.
That's in subjectivity.
Right.
But it's dangerous because subjectivity also lends to like anger and suffering.
Right. Well,
like, the dark side, like
right.
quite literally.
Because it's tied to your emotions. And pleasure is one of the chief driving things that drives subjectivity. Because to not feel shitty, you'll seek pleasure. So it could be sex, could be drugs, alcohol, food, right? And if you have nothing as a counterbalance, then now you run the risk of becoming incredibly one-sided or an extremist of one kind or another.
Yeah, that's really good to point out. Like the counterbalance would be like meaning. And if you don't have said meaning, you're going to be the monkey in the corner.
Okay.
You know.
The counterbalance is being stoic, being objective.
Okay, so it's deeper than just meaning.
Right. It's about being present. So you become a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker. That's the counterbalance, right? Right? And it's the two wolves that are fighting inside of you internally. And then once you accept them both, and then you train the objective one more, it becomes the dominant one, and the other one becomes submissive. Because that's the nature of two competitors. Someone has to dominate, someone has to be submissive. Subjectivity is dominant, and it's fostered and amplified by the type of society that you live in. And unless you're actively seeking objectivity, stoicism, unless you're training to be present in the current moment, then that's the only way to change the nature of the relationship. So then subjectivity becomes submissive, and then objectivity becomes dominant. And then it still allows you the freedom to have your subjective views, all that stuff. Because again, a healthy subjectivity is just a unique way to express you as an individual. That's the value in it. But unchecked, it'll destroy you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
There's a few things that I have to process still. Because I feel like the critical, objective, thinker. Renegade thinker.
Renegade, humanist, individualist, critical, objective thinker.
Yeah, I said renegade thinker. It's not that...
No, you're a renegade individualist. That you break with the conventions of society.
Right.
The cynic. Or the cynic's a renegade. Renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker.
Yeah, sorry, I'm tired, but no.
It's okay.
You saw the pause I had where I was like trying to figure out, because each of those things, deeply contextualized, will... I'm just saying will, I don't know for sure, I haven't thought about it, but those things do really connect with cynicism and like all these
Stoicism, right? All these things... you could think of cynicism and stoicism as the first steps towards objectivity, right? It was the first steps. To somehow think of those philosophies as being complete, I think, again, is a disservice. That they're the first step in the evolution of that philosophy. And ultimately, what does it lead to? Well, it leads to critical objective thinking.
Sorry I'm tired for this episode, but I was so taken back in that moment. I was like, wait a minute, my brain like just can't fucking process this. This is actually like contextualizing so many different things together all at once.
Right, and that's the point. That's why you seek the hardship, the hard road. You travel, you train, you learn. And it's all to evolve you, right? So that you can be this ultimate expression of you, which represents the highest potentials that you're capable of. And it's not a race. It's not something you're going to accomplish in the course of a couple of years. It's a lifetime purpose. What more meaning could there be then to your life? You want your life to be meaningful? Then you get on the road and you show up and you train and you do what's required. You physically condition the body, you train the mind, meditation, and then you find a way to refine your own spirit so that you can live in such a capacity that you're free from anxiety and suffering and stress. I don't know. To me, I didn't come into it thinking like this. I had to evolve this thinking. The person that I was at 20 who desperately needed this couldn't find it. I couldn't find it. So then I had to spend 30 years to become that person that I needed when I was in my 20s. Because this thinking, for anyone who's in their 20s, this thinking will liberate you. This thinking will create freedom from the smoke, from the illusion. Right? But it's only because you willfully choose the path of hardship, discipline, training. I'm sorry, there's no easy workaround. Unless you want to try and do as much ayahuasca or DMT and somehow thinking that it'll resolve everything. To me, the slow burn, the lifetime in the pursuit of this will allow for you to realize the entirety of who you are. And I came into it late because I had to figure it out because nobody was talking like this.
When I hear about people that do like ayahuasca or these different pilgrimages, as they say, it's like, it's not that you get anything from it besides a drastic realization that shit needs to change. You can get that sober.
Yeah, and this is all I'm saying. You can get it as a result of meditation, but here's the weird thing. So many different forms of meditation. You just need to find the one that works within your sensibilities. And the same with any kind of physical conditioning of the body. You find the one that works for you. And you recognize that when you start that it's an evolutionary process. So you might start as a rock climber, but by the end of your days, you could be a deadlifter or a martial artist or whatever. It doesn't, and remember, it doesn't matter. It just matters that you're out there training. Even the Cynics recognize that, even though most of them were incapable of doing it. The original Cynics, right? So I offer this up to you, right? And I know I'm breaking the rules because I'm a bit impassioned, but I take this shit seriously. I suffered for a very long time before I became free from my own suffering, right? Okay, I think that's a perfect place to bring this to a close. I hope you found the conversation interesting. If not challenging. So, is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
So sorry, I'm so tired today. Okay, guys.
Okay.
I thought today was great though.
You don't have to apologize. It's all good. Life gets in the way, right? But you still make the effort. That's all you got to do, right? Just show up. That's all you got to do. Get through the front door. Just show up. And then once you do that, keep showing up. And you only address the day, today. You show up today. Don't worry about tomorrow. Right? Just get to the end of today. And part of the end of today is you honor that requirement for you, for that self-evolution. Right? And then you get to the end of the day, you crash out, and then tomorrow when you get up, a new day, a new challenge. And you just get to the end of the day. And getting through the end of the day, show up, do the training, all of it, okay? Figure it out. Okay, so in closing, I would like to say, question everything, including yourself, especially yourself. Seek balance, seek knowledge, seek understanding. Become a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker. Thank you for your time.